Okay, so I'm very happy to be back in Tennessee, and now I'm going to talk about a problem in theoretical ecology, and it's also related to evolution by natural selection. So I'm going to focus upon functional responses. As you know, the functional response is the number of prey caught per predator per unit of time, and the most common one is the Holling type 2 functional response. And I will also argue in this lecture why it is such a common type of functional response. However, many of the functional responses that occur in the biological literature, they're somehow introduced a little bit ad hoc or a little bit by hand-waving intuitive means. Whereas if we want to really understand how they evolve by natural selection, we have to give every parameter a precise interpretation in terms of individual behavior, not something on the population level, because selection happens at the level of individuals, and now I don't know what to do.
Just move the mouse.
Okay, so you have to be active, otherwise it goes to sleep. Also happens to the audience sometimes. Okay, so you know, because selection happens at the level of individuals, not on a group. So we have to give each parameter a clear-cut biological interpretation in terms of individual behavior. So in this talk I will give a mechanistic derivation of the so-called Beddington-De Angelis functional response, which is in a sense a generalization of the Holling type 2 functional response. And this I will give this derivation in terms of individual behavior of prey and predators. And this derivation introduces a new concept, or I don't know whether it's new, but we have coined it timidity of the prey. That's the inclination to hide when the predator becomes very common. So there is a higher risk of being eaten by a predator. And then I will study the evolution of this timidity by natural selection within the framework of adaptive dynamics. And I will give a short introduction also to the elements of adaptive dynamics. And the main results are here, that if you know that predator-prey dynamics can lead to either there can be steady state dynamics, everything is just at an equilibrium, or we may have cycles, and these cycles typically can arise by a Hopf bifurcation, like in the Rosenzweig-MacArthur model. And what is interesting here is that we may start with the constant dynamics, but natural selection will favor a reduction of timidity. And then when this timidity, which is a parameter also in the dynamical models, changes due to evolution, the Hopf bifurcation may occur. And that leads to cycles. So this is an evolutionary path route to cycles. And on the other hand, if these cycles have sufficiently large amplitude, then selection may favor higher level of timidity, which means that I will show this more in detail later, that there might be an evolutionary attractor. Everything will go to an evolutionarily steady strategy, and we will have cycling behavior. So the functional response is by definition the average number of prey consumed by one predator per unit of time. And I already mentioned the Holling type 2 functional response, which here is the formula for it, where X is the prey density, H is the handling time. I will return to this later, and A is the attack rate, so the rate at which a searching predator is attacking prey individuals. And then, as I already mentioned, there have been a lot of other kind of functional responses related to this one. Generalizations have been proposed, but very, very rarely have they been given this mechanistic underpinning, so derivation in terms of individual behavior. So one of these generalizations is here now on the screen, where we in the Holling type 2 we have here just the y is not there, so r is 0 and the p is 1. And this was I think proposed independently by Bennington and De Angelis in the same year, 1975. And later, and they used as an argument that there is some interference between predators, and that's the reason why the predator density also should appear here, or in the denominator of the functional response. As I said in the introduction, my explanation here will actually be a property of the prey, the timidity of the prey, and not a property of the predator. I don't claim that this is the only mechanistic derivation, but so far I haven't seen a convincing derivation using this interference between predators, actually. Then in the late 1980s, Arditi and Ginsburg introduced this ratio-dependent predation, where actually P here is 0. And there was a lot of debate and criticism and almost fighting, I would say, about it. As a matter of fact, I will show now that in my derivation, the parameter P will actually not be a parameter, it will be a constant 1, which cannot be varied. 1, you cannot vary it, it's 1. So my derivation will not give an explanation of the ratio-dependent predation, and as a matter of fact, I don't think that you can actually give a convincing derivation of that one. So let's actually, just as a warm-up, look at the Holling type 2, which might be familiar to most of you, because the ideas are already here. So the Holling type 2 functional response depends on the fact that handling the prey takes time. You have to find it, you have to kill it, you have to consume it, you have to digest it, and so on. And then also a separation of timescales, because this foraging, handling of prey, and so on, they are rather fast events. They compared with population dynamical events like giving birth and dying. And so they happen at a much shorter time scale. So let's quickly go through. This might be familiar to many of you. We subdivide the predators into searching and handling predators. And as I said, A is the attack rate and H is the handling time. And then on this short time scale, we get a system of ODEs in this way, when we have so law of mass action here for finding prey. When a searching predator finds a prey, he moves into the handling class, and the handling time is h, so there is a rate of going back into the to the searching class, which is 1 over h, and you get this. And of course, because on this time scale we can neglect deaths and births, there is a conservation law. The searching plus handling prey make up the total number of prey, and this remains constant when on this time scale. So we can look at the quasi steady state by just putting the derivative equal to 0, and from this we can just solve by elementary algebra that the searching predators equal the total amount of predators divided by this 1 plus AHX. And then the number of prey caught per unit of time this is the number of prey caught per unit of time. It's A times X times the density of the searching predators, and then you have to divide by the total amount of predator to get the functional response, and voila, you get this well-known Holling type 2 functional response. And now my mechanistic derivation of the Beddington-De Angelis functional response goes along the same lines, but now we also divide the prey individuals into two groups: those that are foraging and susceptible to predation, and those who are hiding, and they cannot be caught. But then we get for the searching and hiding predators, searching and handling predators, precisely the same as we had before, with the only difference, and this is important difference, that they can only attack foraging prey individuals, because those that are hiding, they are safe. They have gone into a refuge or something. And for the foraging and hiding prey, we have something similar. B times y is the rate at which a prey go from foraging into the hiding compartment. And we assume that this is a constant times the density of predators, which a prey individual can typically sense the density of the predators. One could ask why we have the total amount of predators and not only the searching ones, but the prey individuals often use the olfactory sense, and so they can smell predators around, and they cannot make a distinction but whether they are handling or searching. So this is a biologically reasonable assumption. And then tau here is the expected time they spend hiding, and this we assume now to be constant. And the reason is that sooner or later they have to go back to the foraging stage, because otherwise they will starve to death. So it doesn't depend on whether there are thousands of predators around. They can choose between staying hiding and certainly die from starvation, or go out and have a small probability of not being caught by a predator. And so this is also biologically reasonable. Of course, here we should have also a loss term from the foraging, which is due to being caught by a searching predator. However, this term, I have written it in blue because under certain assumption it can safely be neglected. For instance, if the A is much smaller than the B, and this is perhaps what is biologically most common, that the predator is comparatively rare in comparison with the predator, with the prey. The predator is rare, so the predators are usually smaller, and I mean you can see thousands of zebras being and only one lion, so it makes sense. Yeah, but it's not. No. It's let's see now. You see, it's you cannot neglect it here because this has to do with how the predator changed from one class to another. So here is really no loss of predators happening. Here in this model it plays a slightly different, even if it's exactly the same term, you are right, but it plays a different role. So here it is negligible, although it is not here. And the reason is that here we have X here, and here we have Y. So the Y on both sides, they are on the same order of magnitude. But so it's only really here that it in the third equation that it should be or could be neglected. Okay, so this I already said and explained, and let's now see, and I won't go through all the details again because it's completely analogous to what I showed for the usual case of the Holling type 2 functional response. We do the time scale separation, and we can express the foraging prey in terms of X and Y, and we arrive then at a functional response which is the same as the Holling, with this extra term in the denominator, which has as a parameter b times tau. So this coefficient b times tau, they occur always together. And this I call the timidity, because, and it's only the product that really matters. So the b is the rate out of the foraging phase into hiding, and tau is how long you stay there. So you see that if either of this is 0, then there will be no hiding compartment of the prey, and we are just back into the Holling type 2 functional response when b times tau is 0. So either of them is 0. And this what I want then to emphasize here again is that this b tau reflects prey behavior and not predator interference. Also, this Beddington-De Angelis functional response has sometimes been said to be an intermediate case of the Holling type 2 and the ratio-dependent predation functional response. But in this derivation, this is not so, because this thing here is, as I said before, not a parameter, it is a constant. So we don't get ratio-dependent predation as a special case. Okay, so now when we have this functional response, we can embed this result into a population dynamical model. And now I prefer to write this okay, so model like this, and the idea is here that it's only the foraging prey that serve as food for the predator. So those should appear in the growth rate and in the consumption rate. So so this thing here, the xf and little f, this should equal the functional response. But I write it like this, and then for the predator, we then have the same consumption factor here with some conversion factor converting predator prey eaten to new predator offspring. And we assume here now in this model that the death rate is density independent. And yeah. And the next thing I want to do is to look at how this b tau, the timidity here, how it evolves by natural selection. And this I will do within the adaptive dynamics framework. So let me spend a few minutes on giving you an idea of the basic ideas in adaptive dynamics. So a central notion is that of invasion fitness. And that's defined for a rare mutant, a potential invader, which has a trait value theta m for mutant, and the invasion fitness is always defined for a given environment. And this is the environment determined by the resident population. So in general, in the way I model population dynamics is that all the interaction between individuals come through an environmental feedback loop. So the individuals affect the environmental condition, and then the environmental condition affects the individual behavior. And if the environmental condition is a known function of time, then we get a linear model, but time dependent. But then the model becomes non-linear because of this feedback to the environment. And so the definition of this invasion fitness is simply the long-term average exponential growth rate of the mutant population, which is and so we need now to make use of this definition a population dynamical model, so that we can calculate this thing here. And we do it, as I said, by using this environmental interaction variable. So the resident dynamics, where no mutant is present trying to invade, we have k different types. So with different traits present, we label them by theta I, and they grow. And the growth rate depends on the environmental condition, which in turn depends on the population. So we have this feedback. But now you see that if we forget this second row and assume that E is a given function of time, then we have a linear model. The mutant dynamics is the same, but here we use the environment given by the resident only. And the reason for this is that as long as the mutant remains rare, it interacts mainly with resident individuals. So it doesn't affect this environmental environmental condition so much. I mean, it's negligible compared with how much the residents, which are much more numerous, how much they. So this is really a linear equation for the mutant. And now this invasion fitness can be determined simply in terms of this R, which depends on theta m and E. If we have a steady state, then of course the environmental condition remains constant, and the SE is simply the R given that constant E. So this is the invasion fitness, and what is the rationale behind this? What do we learn from knowing the value of the invasion fitness? If the invasion fitness is positive, then the rare mutant can invade, because initially it will grow exponentially, so it can really invade. But I really wrote here can invade, because it is possible that something else happens, that the resident might strike back and it will initially grow exponentially, but then will be outcompeted by the resident. And but if it's negative, then it will initially decline exponentially, and it certainly cannot invade. And thirdly, if the invasion fitness is, not if, but the invasion fitness is 0 for every type for which this logarithm stays bounded. So, for instance, if we have an attractor which stays somewhere in a bounded region, then for the resident this invasion fitness will be 0. And here are 4 examples of a so-called pairwise invadability plot. And here we have on the horizontal axis the resident trait, and on the vertical axis the mutant trait. And now I assume them to be real numbers, because so one-dimensional traits. Otherwise, pictures would be very difficult to draw. And a plus sign means that the invasion fitness is positive, and a minus sign that an invasion fitness is negative. And here are 4 different possibilities. So in this frame here, we have a plus sign above the diagonal. And that means that if the mutant has a slightly greater trait value, then invasion can happen, because the invasion fitness is positive. And if we assume then small mutational steps, we actually then have a selection gradient here with points upwards. And on the other side of this singular point, it's reversed, so smaller trait values are favored by natural selection. So the evolutionary dynamics on the evolutionary time scale will drive the system to this singular point here. And then at that point, we have minus signs both above and below, which means that this point or this trait value cannot be invaded. So we have an uninvadable evolutionary attractor. And here we have a similar thing, but just with the signs reversed. So we have a evolutionary repeller, which moreover could be invaded by other traits. Here we have an interesting case. It's similar to this case. So we have this is an evolutionary attractor in the sense that it goes to here, but we have plus signs both above and below that, which means that this singular point can be invaded. And here evolutionary branching takes place. So the natural selection drives an initially monomorphic population to a dimorphic population where two different types can coexist. And finally, here is a case of a rather interesting case which has been coined the Garden of Eden. It's uninvadable because if you sit here, there are minus signs on both sides, so you cannot be invaded. You are safe as long as you sit there. But on the other hand, if you are slightly on the other side, then the selection gradient points away from that point, so you will be expelled from the Garden of Eden. If you and now, in order to see how this evolution of the timidity takes place, we have to look at multiple prey types in this Beddington-De Angelis functional response, because we have competition between two types when the mutant competes with the resident, and perhaps initially there were many prey types. And this is actually a little bit tricky, and this is one of my points that if we have the Holling type 2 model and we want to introduce several new prey types, you can almost guess what the multi-type should look like. I mean, for the Holling type 2, should you just add up these I don't write it down. These different prey types, and there may be different attack rates because the predator may attack them at different rates, and your guess turns out to be really what you want, or what you to be true. But the Beddington-De Angelis functional response is a little bit trickier. And you really have to look into how into the details, and it's not difficult. It's rather straightforward. But what you eventually get is that with the same idea of this quasi-steady state approximation. This is the quasi-steady state approximation here. And therefore, the functional response for the ith prey is this. And here I claim that it's not a priori obvious that it should look like this, and it's not. So this is something you really have to work out, and my claim is that if we don't consider the underlying mechanism, So we don't know what the multiple pre-generalization would be. So we really need a model that relates the functional response directly to individual behavior. Then when we have this, we can, after half a page of manipulations, write down the multi-pre generalization. And then I don't have time to give mathematical proofs, so I will only present the results. So first, this is a rather simple mathematical result that at a steady state there can be only one prey type present. But it needs a proof. It's not. I don't think it's completely obvious, but it's 4 or 5 lines of proof that when we have a steady state, then there can be only one prey type, and 2 prey types are considered the same if they have exactly the same timidity. The other parameters here in the model are kept constant, are assumed to be constant. And also, when we then have a steady state situation, then a mutant type can invade only if it has less timidity. So the natural selection drives the system towards lesser decreasing levels of timidity. And this means that one possibility is that the timidity goes all the way to 0, and then we end up with the Holling type 2 functional response. So this is one way in which the Holling type 2 functional response might have evolved by natural selection. But now it may happen that we have a Hopf bifurcation when this timidity changes due to natural selection. And when this happens, we'll have population dynamical cycles. So this is the typical Hopf bifurcation, which we observe already in the Rosenzweig-MacArthur predator-prey model. It's exactly the same. Now, of course, the model is slightly different because in the Rosenzweig-MacArthur model, we assume all the time that we have a Holling type 2 functional response. Now we have something different, but still qualitatively the bifurcation pattern is very, very similar. But this means now that we can't be content with just looking at steady state dynamics. We have to look at evolution in a cycling resident population. So here is now a picture. So on this left panel, we have this pairwise invadability plot, and this line here is where the Hopf bifurcation occurs. So on this side, when we have very high timidity, we have steady state dynamics, a global attractor, steady equilibrium as a population dynamical attractor. But when in this region here we have cycling attractors. And this is now a picture of the population dynamics. And now I don't remember exactly for which value of the timidity, but that is not so important. Let me explain what actually happens if we start up here. If we start up here, we will have steady state dynamics, and as was already proved, I didn't prove it here, but I proved it in the paper, evolution by natural selection will drive the timidity to lower values. And then it will actually pass this line where the Hopf bifurcation occurs, and we have cycling behavior. Still, we have this minus above and plus below, so selection drives until lower and lower timidity values. But then the cycles, after Hopf bifurcation, the cycles typically start to grow, and so the amplitude starts to grow. And then, if the amplitudes are sufficiently large, then the situation is reversed, so that higher values of timidity are favored by natural selection. So in this case, we will have an evolutionarily stable strategy here. So an uninvadable evolutionary attractor with a corresponding population dynamic, corresponding to a cycle, a predator-prey cycle of this type. So this shows that these cycles may occur as a consequence of evolution by natural selection, and also that there is an intermediate timidity value which is different from zero, which is an evolutionary attractor. So it's not so that if everything stays within a steady state dynamics, then the timidity goes to zero, but it need not go because of the cyclic behavior which may happen in between. So let me just summarize the main conclusions. From the results which I presented, we immediately see that if there is no Hopf bifurcation, then the timidity will necessarily evolve to zero, because then we will have steady state dynamics all the time, independently of the timidity value. So the timidity, and we know already that for constant case, so steady state dynamics, smaller values of timidity will always be favored. So everything will go to timidity zero, and the resulting functional response will be the Holling type 2. And also, if there is a Hopf bifurcation, then this will necessarily lead to cycles, because either there are cycles already in the starting situation where we start our analysis, but if we start from a steady state situation, we know that natural selection will drive timidity to lesser values, so necessarily it has to undergo a Hopf bifurcation, and then we will certainly get these cycles. And if for some timidity value the cycles will be sufficiently large, then the timidity will actually evolve to an uninvadable positive ESS, so evolutionarily singular or stable strategy. And this is also interesting because it shows that the somehow optimal, this is perhaps the wrong word, value of the timidity can be somewhere, can be greater than zero. So we will have this kind of evolution. As a final remark, I would like to stress once more that it's extremely important to being able to interpret the parameters in the functional response in terms of individual behavior, because natural selection operates at the individual level, and in order to even address the question of how the functional response evolves, we need to have this clear-cut biological interpretation in terms of individual behavior. Also, without an explicit interpretation of the functional response in terms of individual behavior, it's not at all obvious what the functional responses should look like in this multi-prey model. And also what is important is that these trait values relate to, or the functional response, when the functional response is given in terms of individual behavior, you also these parameters then also relates to fecundity and so on, and it's not at all obvious how these are related unless we have this interpretation in terms of individual behavior. Let me just give one example. There has been a lot long ago written about R versus K selection, which I think is nonsense, because R and K are parameters at the population level. The population growth rate at low densities is R, and K is the carrying capacity of the environment, so somehow the maximum population level. But if you do careful modeling and give a mechanistic derivation of the logistic equation, then you will see that this both R and K contain many different parameters which reflect individual behavior. So changing R will almost necessarily, or I would say necessarily, change K. So and of course it's not R or K that are selected, but these individual traits. And finally, I would like to acknowledge that this talk is based on joint work with Stefan Geritz and on 3 papers that we have written together that have appeared in JTB in 2012 and JMB in 2013, and the last one so far last year in the Journal of Theoretical Biology. Thank you very much for your attention.